Hello, everybody. I have a very special guest with me today, Deanna, and we're going to dive into fascia blocking, nervous system regulation. And I met Deanna uh, almost 20 years ago at a longevity conference in, well, it's like a concert to me, in California. And we just hit it off. We were chatting, and I remember I was still eating like a mushroom appetizer, and she was telling me about blocking. And I said, one day I will block. And I have been blocking. I love blocking. We're going to dive into what is blocking. And so, welcome, Deanna. Introduce yourself, please.
Oh, thank you so much, Tanya. It's an absolute pleasure to be here sharing with you. I love the fact that blocking is now a verb.
Yes, yes.
That just like makes my heart sing, seriously. Okay, dive into who I am and what I do.
For all our
I was,
who don't know
but
you, who are you?
I was certified as an athletic therapist back in 1995. And my focus was always deep tissue work. And I had a really healthy practice because I had good, strong hands and I could really find that scar tissue and break it up really well. But as much as my own practice was successful, my own personal body was quite the opposite, even though I was doing everything that I was trained to do to have a healthy body. I was 50 pounds overweight, struggling with anxiety, depression. I was constipated all the time. And it's fascinating when, you're working really hard to do what you're taught to do and you're actually going in the opposite direction. You add this component of feeling like a failure, and why is my body not responding even though I'm putting the time and the energy in? So when I was 30 years old, I made some changes in my life, and these changes resulted in me having serious anxiety attacks. And this one anxiety attack in particular was the seed of pretty much everything to come, because in that moment, when I was in absolute panic, I actually thought I was going to die because I couldn't catch my breath. I was like frozen in this state of fear. For some reason, I intuitively dove my hand deep into my abdomen. The first thing I encountered with pain was pain, and I let out a gasp, an exhalation. So first of all, the pain brought me out of my crazy thinking. It brought me into my body. But then I also recognized, okay, I'm going to survive another day because I found my breath. So for that evening, for about 30, 45 minutes, I was just intuitively exploring with my hands in this tissue. And what I found really interesting was that it felt like it was marbled with scar tissue, even though I hadn't had any injury or surgery in that area. And suddenly I had this aha moment, because I would go for 5-mile runs. I was doing Tae Bo, aerobics, weights, you name it. I was trying it to change my body. But now I'm feeling all the scar tissue, and I was recognizing that, well, no wonder when I'm coming home from a 5-mile run, dripping wet with sweat, that my belly would still feel cold. Suddenly I recognized there was no blood flow getting to this tissue. So it was quite fascinating, because I was very calm that evening as I was exploring inside my body. And, not a typical scenario for me. Woke up the next day a little tender from the work I had done, but all day long I had that sense of calmness, and I was actually excited to get back after work the next evening and to go back and explore and see what would happen. So I did it again for another 30, 45 minutes. And when I stood up, I felt different. I felt taller. And I went and I looked at myself in the mirror, and my belly was flatter than it had looked in years. And I mean, I was doing 400 sit-ups a day. Like I'm extreme in the things that I do. But all of that extreme focused energy kept resulting in me getting more compressed, more congested, ballooned, bigger, toxic, all of these things. So I just felt horrible. And now, after literally only 2 days of working intuitively with my hands in my belly was flatter. So this became my new approach. Rather than working out anymore, I would come home after working on patients all day long, and then I would come home and I would use my hands and I would work on my own body. And within 2 weeks, my chronic low back pain was going away. My whole personality felt different. I was excited about life. I was hopeful, which was such a strange concept for me, because I'd been living with this dark cloud over my head for so many years. So it was like it was lifting by simply doing this. So I started flipping my patients onto their backs, and I started approaching their tissue in a similar way that I was working on mine. And I was getting tremendous results, which started attracting other therapists to learn my technique. And that was 23, 24 years ago already. So that was how this whole journey began.
Very nice. Yes. And I met you at the beginning of that. Now, when did the actual block, here, I'm sure you have a block, but I'll just, if I ever do put this on video here, I have my baby block, my mama block, and I got my face block coming. And I have my mat over there. And I have two sets, one for upstairs and one for downstairs. And so when did the actual block come into this? Because I know for myself, a lot of us, like, you have strong hands, but I don't, I mean, my hands are fine, but they're, it's just much easier to lay on a block and have it like in my belly. So, that's how we start all the classes and sessions, is you put the belly or the block in your belly for 3 minutes. So when did the actual block come into existence? Just curious.
And that was around 2010. And it's neat because I had tried teaching people to do this work for themselves with their hands, but there's a lot of limiting factors to that. And at the time, because I was working on patients all day and then coming home and using my own hands, I was tired. Like, my body was always tired. So I was doing weekly restorative yoga classes. And it was this one class where my teacher, who was amazing, she has me doing a sideline twist over a bolster. And she cautions me. She said, this gets really, really deep, so be careful. But for years, I was used to working super deeply with my hands and my own body. So I'm lying on this bolster and I didn't even feel it. And I had an Iyengar wooden yoga block nearby from my yoga days earlier. And I said, you know what, I want to lie on that. She's like, oh my gosh, you're crazy. It's too deep. And I'm like, no, just trust me. I'm going to lie on it. So I do. And in that moment, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have to use my hands. I can use my body weight and gravity to move into this piece of wood. The only challenge was it was rectangular. So it had sharp corners and edges. So for a couple of years, I worked with a woodworker and we created the actual size and shape that it is today with the rounded edges to make it comfortable to move into the body. That was about 2010 when this all began.
Okay, because I was rolling before that. So I would put the roller across my belly, which is like a pillow, like a bolster, but, can be too intense for some people. But okay, so that 2010. Now, I have to tell you, so in August of 2020 is when I had rolled for years and I was like, I'm ready for Deanna. I'm ready for something more. And I got my blocks in August of 2020 and I blocked for 18 months every day. And it's addictive. You do like a 30-minute session, and some days I'd be on my block for 2 to 2.5 hours. It is so relaxing. So I want to talk about that in a second, but I know for people, because weight loss is always like, on top of people's minds, what I started to notice was that my thighs were getting thinner. And this is the inflammation. Right. And so if you can dive, I'd like to talk about inflammation, because that's what you noticed as well. Because I try and tell people, like, I still exercise, your diet and everything's like this, but it's not always go, 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 hard, hard, hard. Like, our bodies need to heal. So I'd love to talk about the inflammation, and then the nervous system. For me, I cannot tell you what a calmer, more centered person I am from blocking. Like, I am just so much nicer to myself. So let's dive into that.
I love to hear that. So let's first talk about the tissue that we actually focus on, which is the fascia system. So there's a lot of different understandings of this tissue. I feel I still have a very unique understanding of it. Like skin to the body, fascia is the skin to the cell, interconnecting every one of our trillions of cells together. And the goal is that every one of our trillion cells is positioned where it's supposed to be. Because if that's the case, there's optimal space inside the cell and around the cell. And the reason that's important is because the nutrients absorb through the cell membrane into the cell, and then the toxins are taken out of the cell into the system to be eliminated. And as long as there's ease of flow, there's no struggle in the body. There's ease in the body. When we have less space in the body, So those cells now don't have that same opportunity for ease of absorption and ease of waste removal. Now there's stress in the body, and that down the road becomes dis-ease or disease. So ultimately what is going on is we are under the constant influences of life's forces, and the fascia system is the response to that. So the first force that we're always dealing with is gravity. Gravity is constantly compressing us. So the thing is, though, we don't compress linearly. We don't just squish in a straight line. Because we're dominant on one side and for a whole bunch of other reasons, we wind down. So we become shorter and wider as we get older. So a lot of us feel that we are struggling to lose weight as we get older, or that we are accumulating fat. But what's really happening is that we are compressing under the force of gravity, and that compression will cause ballooning. If I had a balloon in my hand here and I squeezed one side, it's going to extend on the other side. So doing something over here isn't going to change that. I have to release that compression so things can come back into balance. So as we start tipping off balance, the fascia, which is also here to provide both mobility and stability for the body, it has a consciousness to it. It's saying, hey, wait a sec. If you keep tipping over to the left further, you're going to fall. So it creates structures or adhesions, which are basically collagen, that grip and adhere to everything in its path to stop us from tipping over. Now, if we correct that in the moment, no worries. But the thing is, we're not really very conscious beings for the most part. We're not conscious of posture. We're not conscious of breath. We are dominant on one side, so we literally wind down over time. So these adhesions act like scar tissue. So scar tissue, if you have an injury or a surgery, basically it's collagen with no life in it. There's no elastability. So adhesions are like slow forming scars that work through the layers of the fascia and grip to bone to create a stable structure from tipping over. But unfortunately, those adhesions, as well as scar tissue, block blood and oxygen flow to cells, and they also block the ability for the body to fully clean itself because they act as barricades to that flow. So with that compression, we decrease in space. So the goal is optimal space. As we get older, we lose space, and there's a time-space continuum. So as we get older and we decrease in our internal space, if we can put the space back, which is what this process does, fascia decompression, we can take the time out. So if you think about that, that has implications on every level of our health and our being. So even just talking about weight loss, you know, we all know that as we get older, our metabolism slows down. But why does that happen? That happens because of all the trillions of cells we have in the body. If a number of those cells are no longer active participants in our body, they don't need to be fed anymore. So there's less energy required for the body to function. But we still eat the same amount. We still might exercise the same amount, but now there's less cells using that. So our metabolism slows and we start accumulating all of this substance or stuff in the body that isn't getting metabolized through activity. So with the process of releasing adhesions, which is what we do with block therapy or fascia decompression, which is the sort of larger generalized science around this, we melt through those adhesions, restore life in tissue previously blocked, pull it back into correct alignment, and awaken those cells. So now they're hungry. So now our metabolism actually increases. So that has huge implications over how our bodies look, function, feel. And essentially, we go in the opposite direction of what gravity is doing, which is compression. So we compress and balloon and we become toxic. With this process, we decompress and we detoxify so that the cells, again, are positioned where they're supposed to be and there's ease of flow. And then that's ultimately, it's not about this body or this body size being the right size and shape. It's about cellular alignment. That's the key. And whatever that is for you as an individual, however that looks, whether you're a size 4, a size 12, it doesn't matter. It's all about having your cells positioned appropriately for ease of flow.
So it's very interesting because, you know, Deanna and I, when we were chatting, you know, I wrote my book, Cookie Dough in the Dark. So, you know, spent so many years just focused on trying not to eat sugar, right? Which was just so like such a narrow version of trying to get out of this horrendous emotional mental, physical, chemical addiction. And one of the pleas that I started when I did this menopause made, oh my God, I can't speak, menopause made podcast was for women to stop dieting for weight loss. That is one tiny piece of their puzzle, right? And and dieting can cause inflammation. It can cause our thoughts, it's hate. Like there's just not a lot of great things about putting all of our eggs in that basket. And during this process of me leaving that diet world, I moved into understanding that we're just cells. Like I'm just a cell everywhere. And so I started to look into cellular health, right? So I just love and appreciate what you just said, because when we can take our body and understand how it's working and understand our cellular connection, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I also learned many years ago that our cells, like you said, are in alignment. And it's like, if you want stronger bones, this kind of, I don't know if this works, but you have calcium receptors and you have calcium cells, and they need to connect. And so it's like taking a light and trying to plug it into the wall beside the socket, hoping that we connect these cells. And then when we get into proper alignment, we create that space back in our body. The light switch now, or the light plug goes into the plug, and the light comes on. And now we are better able to use these things in our body to make us healthier beings. And that's my passion for people, is don't wish yourself thin, wish yourself to be healthy and vibrant. And this is why you're vibrating on the screen. You just look vibrant. It's just, just so at peace. And that is what I have found with doing this blocking. Like, I just feel like so much more space, because I say to people, we're more space than matter, right? And when we get pain, what happens is now we're crunched up in this pain ball. So I say it's like a sponge. You have a dry sponge. It's crunchy, it's crackly. But if you add water, like hydration and movement, now you have this beautiful sponge. And if you think of every cell like that, it just changes how you treat your body.
It absolutely does. And I love that. I use that sponge analogy a lot, because literally we are like a sponge. We absorb everything. So however old you are in this very moment, your outer expression, your inner world, is a reflection of everything you've absorbed from what you've eaten, what you drink, the relationships that you have, the air that we breathe. I mean, we simply keep pulling it into the body. And in the 50s, compared to the 50s, we have 144,000 more toxins in the world. And think of pollution. Like, when you see those pollution bubbles, the more polluted, the bigger the bubble. That's the cell that's under, that's this polluted. So it's not like we have more cells in the body. We have cells that are ballooning, and because they're compressed and ballooning, they are also toxic. So they keep expanding. So yeah, and it was when I was in exercise physiology, I learned from our instructor that there's only 2 times in your life when you actually increase the number of fat cells: when you're babies and at puberty. Otherwise, if your size is changing, it has nothing to do with an accumulation of more fat. So all of the concepts of weight loss that we have been trained to believe, of course, what we put in our mouth matters, because again, our bodies have to process and get rid of. So if you're eating garbage all the time, the body's going to have to work a ton harder to get rid of that. If you're eating healthy, then it doesn't have to work so hard. However, if your body is riddled with adhesions and you're eating a wonderful, healthy, organic diet, or you're taking wonderful supplements that your body is supposed to be able to utilize for health, but you can't get to the destination, it doesn't really matter. So these adhesions will grip and adhere to other things and bone with a force of up to 2,000 pounds per square inch, which is super hard to even comprehend, because, some people look at the block and they think, well, I'm already in pain, as if I want to lie on a hard piece of wood. The thing is, though, when you're lying over a surface area over time and you're in control of it using your breath, it is so comforting. One of the reasons we use either wood or bamboo is because that medium is similar to bone in density. And we want to create this connection between the bone and the tissue and the tool. And when we do, it's like we're giving these deeper cells a hug. So we all know if we're feeling awful or we're sad, like, you know, getting that hug from the loved one, it makes your nervous system, it connects you to your parasympathetic nervous system, and it makes you feel calm, relaxed, and supported. So when we're lying on the piece of wood and we're allowing that pressure to absorb into the body, those cells that are deeper than our conscious awareness are suddenly being heard. And they love it because now it's like you're paying attention to those little cells. I love directing people to The Life of a Cell by David Belinsky. It's a 3-minute video. And every single time I watch it, I literally get chills because you see what happens in one side, in one of our trillions of cells. And it is this beautiful universe of synchronized activity where you've got all these different organelles and all these different things responding in the moment. And it literally looks like a universe. And you think that there's trillions of these working on our behalf to simply keep our body healthy. And yet we don't even pay attention. We don't even know they exist. All we do is we hate things. I used to hate my belly. I used to hate my thighs. I used to hate my body, period, right? And you think of that. Would you do that to your baby? Would you hate your baby because it's crying? No, you'd love it, right? So, you know, when we look at the cell and then we think that we are the outer expression of trillions of these, we want to look after them and we want to keep the space, because now you imagine that universe of activity and imagine crushing it. Think of how you feel if you're in an elevator and you're the only one in the elevator and you're ready to get out, but then suddenly the door opens and, you know, 15 people come in and they're loud and there's cologne and you have allergies to certain things and you're squished in the corner. And I mean, for me, I'd be like, okay, I'm getting anxious. I just want to get out of here. Right. So that's what your cells are doing when we're compressing, when we're not paying attention to alignment and breath, they're getting squished, and yet they're still working their butt off for you, but they're going to scream with a little bit of pain because they're going to say, hey, mom or dad, you're asking me to function so that you can thrive, and you are killing me right now, or you're ignoring me, or you're starving me, or I'm dehydrated, or I'm exhausted, yet you still expect me to go and run a marathon. Like, are you crazy? Right?
Yeah.
So they give us little signals of information, whether it's pain, whether we feel anxiety. I used to always say I have anxiety. Now I'm aware if I feel anxious, I'm not looking after my cells. My cells are giving me information that, okay, you're not doing something right now that's positive for me. So I'm going to give you a little shot of sensation, whatever that may be, so that you can become aware and you can pay attention. And if we can view pain and the negative sensations in our body as just little prompts to pay attention, then we have a direction and we can move through it and we can rebalance ourselves and recalibrate. Where we're trained that, you know, pain is bad, anxiety is bad, restless leg syndrome, let's take drugs, or let's posturally avoid, but let's just avoid because, you know, pain's bad. Pain's not bad. It's the baby crying. It's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. If we view it as this beautiful, loving energy that our body has the capacity to share with us, then we no longer have an enemy of pain. We actually have a best friend.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's very interesting. So, you know, when I'm working with clients, a lot of them are pain. So I'm either blocking, rolling, breathing, stretching, whatever. And there's this fear around pain to avoid it. Like you said, not touch it. Right. And then I know with the blocking that I do, I had neuralgia. And I literally would be walking and I would fall to my knees. The pain, it was like electrical bolt through my face. And this was started about 3 years ago. And anyway, I just had to have a root canal, which I did not want to get, but whatever. I avoided it for as long. But I remember I would spend hours on my face on this block in bed. Like I went to bed with the block. My husband, the block, and I are in bed together because
Same with me.
Still to this day, he's like,
my guy who actually coined the term the block buddy, he now calls it the block bastard, because I've got it under me, and then he'll come and he'll give me a hug, and I'm like, oh, that little bastard's there again.
Oh yeah, no, it's in my bed, it's in the car, not always, but if I'm doing long trips, and it's always with me when I go on a trip. Like I block on an airplane. It's behind my back. It feels so great. But this pain thing, like I said, I literally would spend an hour just having the block on my face to get rid of the pain. And it was really, really helpful. So it is, but it's counterintuitive to, and I know you've talked about your mom and I mean, you deal with a lot of sprains, but it's counterintuitive to put a piece of wood on a painful spot. But trust me, it does dissipate the pain.
And here's why, though, because the pressure fibers in the body are larger in diameter than the pain fibers. So pressure overrides pain. You know, you bump something intuitively, you rub it. So we're not rubbing on the surface because we actually want to get to the root of the problem. So when we're lying on the tool, then we are actively activating the pressure fibers deep to those cells that, again, we're not really consciously aware of, but are sending signals. So you had initially mentioned inflammation. I think this is a great point to really address the value of inflammation, because there's so much talk in the world that inflammation is the root of our suffering. Inflammation is the response to cells not getting what they need. Because think of it, if we sprain our ankle or we break a bone or we have stress in the body intuitively responds with inflammation. All inflammation is directed blood flow, sending nutrients to a site that needs a little more attention. So why we feel inflammation is bad is because if we don't know how to utilize inflammation properly and support it, it can get backed up in the body. And if it gets backed up, it can become stagnant and acidic and actually cause more cellular damage. However, if we use inflammation for the value that it is, to repair and rebuild, and we approach it properly, then it becomes the most important healing agent that we have, which is what it is. It's here to help us heal. I mean, this is how God created our body, to inflame when there's stress in an area because it needs more blood flow, because that's what it needs to do. So when we ice an area, it's like, okay, you just had a baby, and for the first 48 to 72 hours, we're going to ignore it. We're actually going to put it in a cold freezer. Like, that's going to kill the baby. So a lot of cells in that process go through that similar thing. This is when those cells need the most energy. And when we ice it, we actually stop that energy from flowing. But we do need to support inflammation properly. And it's really through the process of proper diaphragmatic breathing, because this will take me into discussing the 3 pillars of what fascia decompression is all about. And block therapy is just one of the ways we can do it. The block is a tool, but it's all about decompressing fascia. So the first thing that we want to do is create the space that we've lost over time. People can use their hands. We use a block for self-care. Either way, though, through the process of lying on this tool for a minimum of 3 minutes, pressure over time creates blood flow, it creates heat. So let's say I've sprained my ankle. So, okay, I want to get some heat into that foot. So I'm going to work through the channels of my leg, but even the calf muscle. If I'm blocking on the calf for 3 minutes, I'm getting a melting of adhesions on that surface area so that we can improve the flow. But the magic is the second pillar, the diaphragmatic breath, because when we breathe diaphragmatically, we are completely physiologically different. There's a lot of information about it. I think one of my favorites is Stephen Cope's book, The Yoga and the Quest for the True Self, where in one of the chapters, he has a lengthy description of the difference between the diaphragmatic breather and the upper chest breather. So when we're breathing diaphragmatically, I'm just going to actually pull my camera down here so I can just share a little bit. So the diaphragm is a plate of muscle right underneath the rib cage. When we inhale, it moves down in the body. When we exhale, it lifts. And if we're breathing properly, it's in constant motion. The thing is, pain, fear, and stress cause us to reactively hold the breath, but we're still going to breathe because we're designed to survive. So when we hold the breath over time, this muscle becomes weak and the weight of everything above comes crashing down into the core of the body. So this crashing down strangles this breath, creates a freezing in this area. And because we're still going to breathe, because we're designed to survive, we're going to ultimately end up using the upper chest muscles, which are the secondary muscles for breathing. So there's a number of reasons why this isn't good, but one of the things is that the diaphragm is like turning on the body's furnace. The upper chest breath is like having a space heater. So I live in a 30-story building. I have 2 rooms in my apartment. If it's minus 30 outside and I have 1 space heater, I can heat literally 1 room in my apartment. If we turn on the building's furnace, the entire building can be heated. So that's really important to know, because flow requires a certain temperature. And as we cool down, I live in Winnipeg, it can be minus 30, for weeks on end. there's very little flow. I live right on top of a river, and there's still flow in the river, but it's way, way less. If I go and try to turn my car on, I've got to let it warm up before I can drive it, where right now it's summer, there's ease of flow everywhere. So the reason it's so important, though, is because oxygen is the most important nutrient for every cell to thrive. Mm-hmm. The ATP, the energy that is created in the cell is fueled by oxygen. And we can feed the body up to 6 times the oxygen when we're breathing diaphragmatically. And I've had many people say, well, it's not like you can inhale 6 times more air into your lungs. It's not about that. It's where the air is getting directed. At the base of the lungs is where the majority of the oxygen receptor sites reside. So if we're breathing through the muscles of the upper chest, we tend to do shallow, rapid breathing. When we're breathing through the diaphragm, that's that belly breath. So we're directing the air deeply into the lungs to reach that bed of abundance of alveoli. So we have optimal absorption of oxygen. And then also, and the people listening are going to love this, in 2014, they did a study proving that 84% of weight loss comes through proper exhalation, because this is our ability to most effectively move the toxins out of the body. And this was why back in my 20s, when I was working out like a fiend and starving myself almost, right? And getting bigger, it's like, how is this possible? How do the rules of weight loss not apply to me? Then I started taking yoga, and I had a great teacher, and every 30 seconds she would remind us to breathe. And every time I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm holding my breath. So, you know, that became a really paramount foundation of understanding for me as I was going through this whole process. People simply aren't breathing. They're breathing, but they're breathing in a much different way. And then when I was reading Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now, that book, you know, he was talking, oh, such a great book. He was talking about how only when we're breathing diaphragmatically are we living in the moment. When we're breathing through the muscles of the upper chest, we're living in the past and the future, which is where fear lives, because it's not real. But also diaphragmatic breathing causes the brain frequency to be in a relaxed state compared to the upper chest breath, which creates that stress state. So if we are breathing diaphragmatically and we are encountering external stress, we can keep our internal world peaceful. And conversely, we can be in a totally relaxed place and time with no external stress coming into the body. But if we're breathing through the muscles of the upper chest, we can still be in a chaotic state inside of ourselves. So we have this amazing ability to regulate our body through the breath. And that's the key, because again, all of the cells, if your body is being properly fed and cared for and hydrated, and you have the right amount of rest, and you have great relationships where you feel loved and supported, likely you're going to feel like a really healthy human. And conversely, if you have everything opposite to that, you won't feel like a healthy human. So we have this capacity to feed our cells the most important nutrient, as well as to remove the garbage through this action of diaphragmatic breathing. But just starting to breathe diaphragmatically isn't enough because of the way the adhesions glue and adhere to bone. So if I'm 50 years old and I'm starting this journey and I've been sitting like this in front of a computer for decades, my diaphragm muscle has now gone into a lock. It's almost like you have a frozen shoulder, you have a frozen diaphragm. So even if you start actively becoming a conscious breather, you're only going to be strengthening the amount of that muscle that you actually have access to. Through the process of melting adhesion, we actually release that pattern that the rib cage has gotten locked into, and we create more of that movement of the diaphragm to pull more air and to move more out of the body. So that's why it's so important to understand both components and how it not only affects our size and shape and our inner state, as far as are we acidic, are we alkaline, but also our nervous system. And then the third pillar is understanding how to not fall back into those negative alignments, because that's the whole point. We are a mechanical body, and we have foundations, just like a building. We have foundations to support those cells in correct alignment. But if we're not conscious of them, then we end up creating these false walls and false floors, which is collagen adhesions, and that blocks flow. So again, in my 30-story building, if there's an earthquake and the foundation shifts, everything up the chain to the very top is going to be affected by what's happening in the foundation. So we have these different postural foundations that we need to understand and strengthen so that we can move in our body over time and not allow gravity to be as destructive as it can be if we're unconscious. And the real beauty lies in the fact that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So gravity is a constant force pulling us down. That full constant exhalation that is really key for weight loss and detoxification, that's the muscle in the core of the body lifting us up against gravity. So now we have this opportunity through understanding proper breathing, how we can go through time without accumulating the negative effects of gravity, which really is aging.
My gosh. Now, see, isn't that just such a, it just, I'm almost speechless, because I'm just like, if we all could embrace that, how different our life would be and how we treat ourselves. Right. And I have been working on my breath for years because, you know, I learned like breathing up here produces anxiety. So you're stuck in this fear state. You're stuck in a sympathetic state. Right. And so it's a practice to breathe into that belly. It is a practice. And then I love how you explain, like adding the blocking, you release those adhesions. So you get to open up spaces that were in the dark, right? And now you get to add light into them, and energy and hydration and oxygen. And then I love also, because I think of, there's this beautiful video out there, I don't know which one it is, but that this fascia system is like a bodysuit, right? And like you said, when we turn our head a little to this way, the whole system just goes to this way here. Unlike a car, where if it goes clunk, 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 you take it and get fixed. Our body, you're just like, oh, okay, it might hurt for a little bit, but you don't get to the root cause to actually, you know, adjust it. And like you said, I don't know if I'll ever have perfect posture, but I'm going to work in that direction. But what I do notice from blocking, which I believe you've said in your videos, is the amount of times I correct myself. Now, I've been personal training since I was in my 20s, and people will still tell me that they can't get out of their head of me saying, like, shoulder blades in your back pocket, chin parallel, walk up the staircase backwards with your neck, right? So there's things that you are aware of, but the more you start blocking and understanding fascia and correcting it, your body, you're just like, that doesn't feel normal anymore. And so you're constantly walking better, sitting better. And I don't always sit perfectly. I've totally got that twist going on here, but I correct myself more because my body is like, this is a better alignment for you. But if you don't correct yourself, your body's used to that distorted alignment. So yes, that's what you're saying with that third pillar, is you begin to understand, oh, this is where I should be.
Yeah. And, you know, even more so recently, in one of my more recent programs in the membership, I also added in a different component than just the blocking and the alignment training, but also changing habits one day at a time. So it's a 30-day program, because again, we're dominant on one side. So if we're not thinking about it, you're always going to reach with the same arm for that cup, or open the fridge, or do your activity, or vacuum, or whatever it is with that same side. And that's what creates those deep grooves in the fascia that cause us to fall into those patterns of alignment. So one of the prompts is, let's just change one thing for one day for 30 days, or for, you know, each day for 30 days. So today it might be, okay, every time you reach for a glass, use the opposite hand. When you're brushing your hair, use the opposite hand. And funny enough, because I mean, it's awkward to brush your hair with the opposite hand. So I've started doing that more recently. And it's funny because I always had this, like on this side, I have a little like up thing. And I was always brushing my hand with my, like doing this, you know, whatever. And so more recently, I've been using my left hand first to brush. And now I don't have that little flip. Like, it's fascinating, those little tiny adjustments. One of the things that I was doing, I was sitting at a restaurant and I was eating soup, and, you know, I don't want to spill. And I mean, it's funny when you start using the opposite hand, how awkward it can feel at first, but I'm eating soup and I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to, like, you know, take my own advice, and I'm going to start eating the soup with the other one. The amount of adjustments that I had to actually make in my body so that the soup wouldn't tip or I wouldn't spill it, right? So like, I was even noticing how my feet alignment had to change to support myself doing this opposite action. But that's the thing, like, if we're always doing something and we aren't paying attention, you know, we keep falling in and we keep making these deeper, deeper grooves in our system that we just get pulled right into. And then before you know it, the other side is so far away from conscious awareness that you really don't even have any connection to it anymore. And I mean, that could even bring us to the concept of trauma, where we dissociate from parts of our being, right? Because we cut ourselves off from feeling or from remembering something so atrocious that we might have experienced or seen or whatever it was. But then we cut it off. And as you say, it's like there's no light getting in there. So there's only the darkness. So it's interesting because this morning I was writing a blog on beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And what that means, because, you know, as I'm kind of like looking at things, beauty, they're basically saying, creates this deep sense of satisfaction in the brain. So, and what is beauty? I mean, to everybody, it's something different, but some people can see it all the time and some people never see it. And for me, you know, I've seen movies before where somebody said, oh, how did you like that movie? And I'd be like, oh, I didn't like it at all. And then I'd see it again and I'm like, what was I talking about? I love that movie. And it's like, everything is based on my state of being. So if I'm in a state where I feel healthy and my cells are looked after, I can see beauty in things that maybe on another day I wouldn't notice are beautiful. And conversely, I can be super agitated, I can feel really resentful, and I see nothing beautiful. So if knowing that beauty creates this deep sense of satisfaction in the brain, and that we actually have the capacity to see things more beautifully because of our inner state, wouldn't that make sense to bring more of that into our lives? And for me, I believe that inner state is really feeding your cells, because if your cells are hungry and congested and starved and, you know, dehydrated, like how can, and if we're an outer reflection of what's going on inside the body, that's the lens that we're going to be seeing life through. So to change that experience and to be able to really enjoy life, we do have control, even in this crazy, crazy world that we live in. I mean, there's a lot of awful things happening, but there's still a lot of beauty. And where are you directed to pay that attention? And I mean, sometimes I can get caught in the politics or the other stuff, and I can get drawn into that. And then I recognize I'm not breathing the same. So
yeah, you're getting tight. And yes, I feel the same way.
Because fear, pain, and stress cause us to reactively hold the breath. So if you're absorbed in that stuff, and I mean, it's one thing to be aware, it's another thing to be absorbed. So try to absorb yourself in the things that actually do bring beauty into your life and make you feel free and peaceful and pure and all of those beautiful, wonderful things that we really want to feel. Clean, right? I mean, when our cells are congested, our cells are dirty. And we do live in a dirty world, but we have this capacity and this ability to keep ourselves clean inside through the activation of that muscle. That is the most important thing in the world, in my view, is learning how to breathe consciously and making that the most important exercise that you do every day.
And it's free, right? A lot of times people say, oh, it's so expensive to be healthy. And every time I say, your breath is free, walking's free, nature's free. A bag of carrots and a bag of potato chips are exactly the same price, but you don't want to eat the carrots. So just be honest, right? And so, but it's these mindset shifts. I don't think being healthy is expensive at all. You don't have to go extreme, right? You can find nature, grounding, breath, grow a garden. There's some very simple things to do, but this is where the mind comes in, because I had all the mind stuff, right? And so, which a lot of us do, I call it mental hunger, right? Because sometimes the chocolate chip cookie looks way better than the cucumber slice, but that's another story. So you know what? Okay, I want to talk about nervous system, but while we're on beauty, you know, you and I are both in our 50s, and there is this, you know, sometimes, what's the word I'm looking for? Pressure to look a certain way. And so I block my face a lot, which I'm sure has helped, because I understand, I love how you say the false walls and the ceilings, right? So that the forehead is dropping and then it has to grip and hold on to it, which is, I guess, what you're saying, the collagen. And when you can do this, you know, the blocking and pull everything back up again, you know, it helps to pull the gravity up. So you can expand on what I know. But I will just sit there with that block right in between my eyebrows here, and I'll just lay there, and I'll go, the eyebrows are so painful. Whoa. And I'll just do all this work. I'll lift up my cheeks. I'll lift up my chin. But, you know, on one hand, like, this is interesting. I'm laying on this block, and I'll do, say, half an hour on my face. And I'll be like, you know what, if I went to get, I'll just say Botox. If I went to get Botox, I would have to drive 15, 20 minutes. I don't know how long a treatment takes because I've never had it. And I'd have to drive home. So it's the same amount of time, right? And so I don't know if I'm justifying it or whatever, but I'm just like, a lot of people will be like, I don't have time. But if I look at the time to get to an appointment, be an appointment, and come home, it's the same amount of time, right? And so I think for me, what I've learned through my menopausal experience so far is what I value. And what I value is cellular health. And what I value is natural beauty. And so this is in alignment with my values. And that's basically, I mean, I'm just goosebumping all over the place. That to me resonates. And if that's not your value, that's fine. But can you just explain a little bit on the face, why blocking helps the face? Oh, and then we open up the neck to get the blood flow, and then you think better. And then we have to go into the nervous system.
Well, and that's why there's three pillars to this, because it's the combination of the three. If we just block and we're not breathing, you'll get some benefit. But if you block and you breathe, now you're getting exponential benefit. But if we block, breathe, as well as understand the full body connection of fascia and how to support our cells in correct alignment, then there's the magic of the actual process. Because again, we can defy what we consider normal aging to be. And aging is different for everybody, even in the old paradigm, because, some people age a lot better than others. Some people live longer, whatever that looks like. However, everybody still accepts aging as this natural process. And this is what's going to ultimately happen in some way, shape, or form. But what if we didn't have to? What if we actually could keep the cells positioned where they are, continue to feed them? What does that look like? And better yet, even reverse what time has done to you so far. And that's what this process does. Because again, if I'm sitting here and this is my posture, and I'm aware that my tongue muscle is in part designed to support the weight of my head, to keep those channels for flow nice and open and symmetry and all of those things, then it's not like I'm not aging. I mean, to me, aging isn't like being 50 looking 20. It's cellular alignment, keeping my cells fed, because I'm still changing, and that's going to happen. But I can control the way I change in a whole different scenario than if I allow this to happen and I allow this to accumulate. Because even when I just do this, you can already see that this side of my cheek is starting to hang further than this side, because it's under the constant influence of gravity. Mm-hmm. The way my eyes will be positioned, I'll end up having one eye that's more dominant. The eyes will end up gluing together. That's going to impact blood flow to the eyeballs, which is going to decrease my vision. That's going to create strain. When one thing that's really interesting to notice in the younger women today, I'll just say, because I've noticed it more in the women, is their hairline. It's coming back a lot younger than our generation, because they're doing this all day. They're on their phones all day long. So as we start tipping forward, as the skeletal system starts tipping forward, the fascia is going in the opposite direction to create a counterbalance. So now let's say here my hairline is, if I'm the youngest version of myself, as I start tipping forward, now those hair follicles are getting pulled further and further back. Wow. And I'm noticing the lines in the throat in the young people accruing much deeper and younger, because again, they're growing up this way. Their breath has been compromised because they're growing up in front of technology, where you and I were hanging on trees and we weren't playing video games when we were 8 years old. We were outside playing, in the earth. So yeah, we had a very different childhood than the kids today. And we also had a mother giving birth to us from a very different alignment than the young ones being born today from mothers who grew up in front of technology. So there's a whole paradigm shift happening with the youth that really is impacting their health. But, back to the beauty aspect, what's happening as I'm tipping off balance is these adhesions are occurring throughout my skull, my scalp, everything's getting locked, because again, the fascia is saying, well, wait a sec. If you're sitting like this all the time, you're going to fall. So we're going to grip, grip, grip. Those grips block blood flow to the surface skin, to the deeper structures in through here. And that creates pockets of aging spots. It creates those lines and wrinkles. And again, it's funny, because if you look at, unfortunately, some of these beautiful women that have done some of these extreme things. You can't undo that. And that's the sad thing, because it's for a moment of something, and it's at a cost of decades of frustration and sadness. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I have lines here, but it's because I choose to smile. Like, I don't want to have no lines whatsoever on my face. I don't want to look like I don't have expression. And that's what happens when you plump things up and you stop the muscles from contracting. Now you're expressionless. And that's like, it's such a strange world, because I mean, and there's so much to the wise old woman too, right? Like, we want to be, and we can be the wise old women and still youthful in appearance and energy and all of these things, but have that wisdom combined with the youth of the body by understanding how to keep the breath going and the breath strong. Mm-hmm. So yeah, beauty is such an interesting concept.
Oh, beauty is such an interesting concept. Yes, it is. And you know what? I still have to work on my breath. Like, I still consciously really have to pay attention to breathing deeply. Like, it is definitely a practice. So, and that's okay, right? I mean, we're always breathing, so we can practice hundreds of thousands of times a day. And just every time you catch that breath not going in your belly, you just put it back in your belly again. But I cannot tell you, I love blocking my behind my ears, on my ears, my jaw, my head. I really notice, like, the right side of my head has way more tension than the left. So you get to really discover about yourself too. So one of the reasons that I took a deeper dive into the blocking was there's certain times in my life, and we've talked about this, where you have more anxiety. And I wish I had started doing this in my 40s, even my late 30s. I think I would have been a much more centered and calm person, but at least I did start, because our nervous system, I'm having a guest coming on here who had a complete nervous system breakdown and was bedridden. And I know that I wore that busy badge and pushed myself. And I always went to the brink of anxiety attacks, but was able to come back. And blocking, combined with my breath and just taking that moment to, and the one thing I love about the blocking is I can just do it anywhere, anytime, for however long I want. You could do 3 minutes and be done. And in 3 minutes, I already feel better. But then it gets addictive sometimes, and you're like, whoo. But is this sense of calm that I just, oh my gosh. And it started with rolling, but it ramped up with blocking, and it helped with my cravings. It helped. I didn't understand the nervous system in my 30s and 40s until my late 40s and 50s. So can you kind of walk us through, like, the 3 pillars and how that helps with the nervous system, and what is even our nervous system? And like, there's lots of signs. Like, when I was talking to this lady, I said, what were your warning signs? She said, I didn't have any. My friends just told me I should just slow down a little bit. And then we kept talking, and she's like, I was tired all the time. And I'm like, there's a sign. Right. But we just go, I got to just keep moving forward. So what's your take on all of this and the nervous system, and how you fall in love with paying attention to it?
Yes, it's interesting, because fascia innervates every single cell, every single tissue, whether it's nerve fibers, blood vessels, muscles, tendons, fat, organ, teeth, everything. Fascia is the connection and the connector. So it's interesting, because what makes this simple from my perspective, because I'm not like, I mean, I took anatomy when I was in athletic therapy. I dissected the bodies and all that cool stuff. But I mean, it's complicated when you look at the specifics of how the body runs, all the different parts, all of the different things. Just like every other part of the body, adhesions will develop through the nerves in the brain. So if your nervous system if the cells in your nervous system aren't getting properly fed and clean, then your nervous system is not being regulated properly. And that's going to result in you not being regulated properly. Because as you mentioned, like, we go into the sympathetic mode. We're supposed to have a balance. We shouldn't always be parasympathetic because we wouldn't get anything done. We need a balance of the sympathetic where action lies and the parasympathetic where we rest and digest. When these are in balance, then the body's in balance. And this comes back because everything comes down to balance. So this also comes back to the dominant on one side. If we're always using one side of the body, one side of the brain is going to be overworking, one side of the body is going to be overworking, the other side is going to become an anchor or kind of like out of reach. So if you had a team of 100 people to do a job, but only 50 of them were working and the other 50 were not doing anything, those 50 that are working are going to have to do the work of 100 people. And then the 50 that aren't working are going to be just a drain to the 50 that are working. So that's what's going on in the body when we're not balanced. Whether our brain isn't working in a balanced way or the body isn't working in a balanced way, we're overusing one part of the body. So exhaustion. So right there is the exhaustion. Mm-hmm. There's the confusion because we're supposed to be balanced. You know, one side of the brain functions more logical, one side functions more intuitive. When we combine the two, we're connecting the heart and the brain together in a sense. And now we have this ability to view the world through the lens of compassion, take in what we need to from that human perspective, and then maybe create a logical, formula from that, as opposed to I'm just going to be linear or I'm just going to be living up here, right? I mean, like we want to balance the two because we are both. We are a physical body and a spiritual being. And if we're always focused on either one or the other, then we're missing the boat because we have to be physical. We are a physical being, but we are actually a spirit living in this physical being. So we want to bring that balance into everything. And when we're not balanced, our nervous system is dysregulated and we don't feel good. And it's going to give us signals, whether it's fatigue, whether it's agitation, whether it's brain fog. If there's adhesions through the nervous system, which there are for every one of us, and we'll never not have them. We're never going to be perfect. We live in a dualistic world where we're being compressed by gravity and there's all these weird forces acting on us all the time. So we won't be perfect. But as you said, we want to be on the path. We've got a couple choices. We can either let gravity and unconscious living direct where we go, or we can be conscious and we can be on the path to moving in the direction of balance and intention. And then again, those are two very, very different skews of life. It's like the difference between the diaphragmatic and the chest breather. You're a completely different animal physiologically. And who do you choose to be? And that's the cool thing. You have the choice.
Yeah.
It's not like you have to pay for it, right? You simply have to understand it. And the thing is, we were born to breathe with the diaphragm. It is the most natural thing for us to do. Breathing through the muscles of the upper chest has become a habit that we've learned because we're being bombarded with pain, fear, and stress. If it wasn't for that, I don't think any of us would have ever lost that diaphragmatic breath, but this is the world that we live. But we have the choice to be that conscious breather and conscious of how we use our body. And if we do, our life experience completely changes.
I love all of that. I really do. And you know what I think sometimes, because I know with working through my eating disorder, is you become addicted, and this is where Joe Dispenza and Biology of Belief, Bruce Lipton, and reading lots of those kind of books, you get addicted to that feeling. Just like we said with the fascia, like if your head's always over or you're bent, your body doesn't know how to correct itself. And until you become aware by understanding your breath or releasing adhesions, it's hard to change because you're not aware. So I always say awareness cures. That was the first thing I had to start to do, was be aware of why I was eating, all this stuff. And then I had to understand that I can get addicted to habits. So my body can chemically want a feeling, not even a food, but a feeling, right? And so what happens is, if you are addicted to fear or anxiety or worry, and now you're starting to do deeper breath work, laying on the block, or just trying to change, there can be a feeling of discomfort. Like you can, and so what I want to, I encourage people in my podcast is I really do empower you. Your health is in your hands, and there are choices you can make. But also, you have to understand that in this process of going where you went, you have to go back to where you were. And if you have been suppressing emotion or fear or stress, Now it's coming up to the surface. And so even as we're talking now, I'm starting to feel this in my chest and my throat, which is where I feel a lot of stuff. Before I would have felt that and I would have eaten because I didn't understand this feeling. Right now, like I can almost feel teary. Like it's all these memories are in your cells. So as you go, I always say it's issues in your tissues. As you work to get these issues out of your tissues, you may go through periods of sorrow or emotional pain, but it's not a bad thing because you're just now getting all that stuff out. So this was part of my eating disorder recovery. It's not about resisting another bag of homemade cookies. That was what I was focused on. But when I started to understand how I'm addicted chemically to not only the food substance, but to the feeling and the habit, and then how do I start to unwind all of this stuff, I started to have a mindset of being on a journey to vibrant living, as opposed to willpower and deprivation and restriction. And I started to give myself grace and compassion and curiosity and learn how to sit in discomfort, which I really want people to understand that this is not all rainbows and butterflies. Like there are times when you're just like, if I ate, I would feel better for a moment, but that's not fixing the problem. So now I'm going to learn how to sit in this feeling of anxiety or loneliness or whatever it is. And I know I trust in my body, my mind, my spirit, my cells, whatever, that I'm going to come out on the other side. So there is a process to going through this. And I definitely know that through blocking, I have been on the blocks and been like, whoa, that just released something. Like that there was some fear stuck in that cell or something. And I definitely, on a physical level, especially when I did the sternum, I felt like somebody had just lit matches on my sternum. Now I can lay on that thing with my arms up in the sky. I'm like, I just want to feel some pain now because I'm just so. But I think it's important to understand that discomfort, like you said, and pain are not bad things to get you over to the other side. So if that all made sense, my little story there.
No, absolutely. And that's just it. Like we can't experience pleasure and joy without experiencing pain and discomfort because they're two sides of the same coin. And I loved how you said when you want to eat when you feel that fear, because oxygen is the most important nutrient for cells. So I think for a lot of people, because we're starving for oxygen, we feel hungry. And so we're trying to feed that hunger, but we're not giving, I mean, even if we are eating good, healthy food, the cell needs the oxygen first and foremost. So by changing how you feed yourself and realizing that oxygen is fuel and food for your body, then it changes the mindset around food. Another thing about food, because I mean, I share that addiction with you. When you actually spend the time and you chew your food, because everything is about how we use our body. And so many people are in a rush, or we use dining as a time to, engage with friends or family, which is lovely, but you can't chew and talk at the same time. And that's the thing, like so many people are swallowing, food whole as opposed to chewing it. And I mean, I remember when I was like a total mess in my early 20s, I'd go to a movie and I would get a family-sized pack of M&Ms and I would eat them all in the movie, but I wouldn't even enjoy one because I was guilt eating. I wasn't chewing. So I wasn't tasting. But here's the interesting thing. When you actually start to chew, if you're eating foods that are like, processed or have a lot of chemicals in them, now you taste them. Yes. And then you don't like them. So if you can actually slow down and say, okay, there's that chocolate chip cookie that I just baked. I'm going to savor every morsel. I'm going to chew it and I'm going to enjoy it. Then you'll probably only eat one, maybe two instead of 8 or 10, right? But you're going to enjoy it. And then you're not putting your system into that place of stress. So now you're still going to be breathing and helping the digestive process. And then your body's going to process it really quickly. And you're not going to have a negative fallout from eating that, whatever it is, where if you go and you stress eat, you might eat 10, you're not chewing, you're swallowing the food whole. Now you're bloated and inflamed. And now you feel like, oh, I've just gained 5 pounds, which you haven't. You've just created inflammation. But So again, like just it's how we approach things that really makes the difference, because I'm all for, hey, let's enjoy. I mean, I don't think we would have a part on our tongue that would actually appreciate sweets if sweets wasn't something that we were supposed to enjoy. Right. I mean, why would God create something that was harmful to us? I don't think that's ever the way that it is. It's just, what are we doing with it?
So, well, you know, I remember eating, and I would eat 10 cookies so fast, so quickly, just to calm myself down. Then I'd be like, okay, now put one on a plate and actually taste it. And so, right, like that's just the frenzy, because I couldn't calm myself down at that. And this is what I say to people over the years. I've learned different tools in my toolbox besides just the deprivation and the restriction, which is so short-lived. And you said something, the importance of chewing. I always say our stomach doesn't have teeth. And chewing, again, is another practice I still work on, because I eat too quickly or I don't chew my food properly. And that is something that's really important to do for digestion. Again, another practice that's free that can have a tremendous effect on your digestion and just how we're giving nutrition to ourselves, and to just take our time. So it is really interesting. It's the society that we live in. We can either just give into it all, which is really easy to do, or, you know, like myself, I decided to go on a different path, and it does take more effort, but I enjoy it more because I feel better. But you are bombarded daily about, you know, eating chocolate bars as a snack, or you don't have time, or like just these messages. And I think you're the same, but I haven't watched TV commercial or news in, oh my gosh, like 25 years or something, because I choose what to feed my brain. Right. And so that affects my nervous system, because I was realizing by taking in this information, I was getting anxious, and then my shoulders come up, I'm starting to close in, my breath goes, and I'm like, whoa. But you don't realize that until you're really aware of how you're responding. So
actually, funny enough, just this morning, I was listening to Greg Braden talking, and he was talking about how they've now discovered that there's, I think he said 40,000 mirror neurons in the heart, which are basically like, you know, they're brain cells, but they're living in the heart. And he was talking about how whether we actually physically experience something or we witness it, the brain doesn't know the difference. So I think of these movies today that are just, you know, I mean, when I was a kid, I used to like horror movies. Horror movies in the 80s were a little different than they are today. I mean, they weren't so just in your face horrible. Like I don't like horror movies at all anymore. But I mean, I think of what people are engaging in, or these video games that are so violent. You know, the brain doesn't distinguish that this is a game or is this real life. So PTSD, I mean, my goodness, like how can you not survive that insult in your body without having negative effect in the guise of entertainment?
I know, right? It's just, this is why I say you have to be deliberate about what, and the things I used to watch, I don't watch anymore. I don't want it in my conscious awareness. I don't want to, it made me feel horrible. So, you know, you just have to, and if your nervous system is shot and you're bombarding yourself with all of this, it's not going to be helping you at all. Oh my goodness. Oh my, we have talked about so many amazing things today. So many amazing things. Is there anything, you know what, Deanna works like blocking, you can work with children. There's no age on it, right? I just know for the menopausal woman, if you haven't, this is a really great time, for just to connect with your breath again, to reduce anxiety, to come back into your center. Oh my gosh, just feel that connection. And just, you know, I say to the ladies, like, menopause symptoms can start around age 35. Perimenopause can last 10, 15 years. Then you go into postmenopause. You have a lot of life to live. And so it's really important that you look after yourself, because you have the choice. You have control right now to breathe more consciously or not. And that can change your tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and it changes your health. And so my plea to women is I want them to be vibrant and energetic in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, not battling chronic disease and spending time at the doctor's office. And so there's little things that Deanna and I have talked about today that are really right in front of you that you can choose to do, right? And
I think one of the most
empower you.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important things is so many of us think that our body is our enemy. I used to think that when the rules of weight loss weren't applying to me. Your body is never the enemy. The external world is the enemy to the internal peace. And you do have the control, and only you do. So if you do give your power away and you feel ugly or unlovable or out of control, just by lying on even a hardcover book and breathing into it, you're now taking control of your life. You can start right this very minute, and you can do that. And when you start pumping that oxygen into your system, your cells start to respond, and then it's one step after another. And then you just keep going from there. So I agree. Like, we want to learn to love ourselves again, because we've been conditioned to believe that we aren't worthy of it, and that's completely false.
Yeah. Well, that was one of my transformations, was that I love myself, and I just had a breakthrough probably in the last 2 months. It's not even that long. And I was walking one day and I just went, I am worthy. I am worthy. I am so tired of telling myself I'm not worthy, I'm not enough. I just said, I'm worthy. And it was empowering. I was literally walking with my dogs, and I just felt this whole thing come over me, and I went, I am worth it. I am worthy. And I think some of what happens now is this comparison theory, like this comparison, because there's always people better than you. And so I'm like, oh, I'm not like that. I'm not like that. But there's also people that, that people might look up to you. And then I realized, you know what? I'm just me. And it doesn't matter about the people, anybody. I'm doing my job, and I'm worthy of love and attention and grace. And so I'm just like, woo, I'm letting that go.
And that's beautiful. And think of all the people you're helping.
I know. And I tried to retire in 2020. I was exhausted. I had hit a point where I was like, I am done, because this profession you and I are in is very giving. And I care more about people sometimes than they care about themselves. And I give and I give and I give and I give. And this is when I had a breakdown in my 30s, where I was like, I can't give anymore. And now that I had kids, and I completely, like, anxiety attacks, just sitting there, rashes coming all over me. And I'm like, okay, Tanya, like, time for some new things to happen in your life. And that's when I really made some significant changes over time, simple shifts over time. But it is, you were in this giving profession, and then I was reading books, and I was having, just being me. And then I thought, I have too much. If I change one person's life, then another person's life changes. And that's what you and I do. We have a ripple. We put a little pebble in a pond, and it just ripples out. And so I thank you for being here, because this will change somebody's life today. So it just plants the seed. All right. So is there anything you'd like to end on? And where can people find you? And I think you have a free resource, and you've written a book. So tell us a little bit about all that.
My website is blacktherapy.com, and in there is a sampler program under programs, which is $9, using a rolled up towel to create the opportunity for people to feel what this is like before making any kind of a commitment. So that's, something that you can jump into. And I also on Amazon have a book, Unblock Your Body, How Fascia Decompression is the Missing Link in Healing. And those two spots. I've got a YouTube channel, which you can access through my website as well. And there's tons and tons and tons of free video and free discussions and resources. And my partner, Quinn Castellane, who's also my nephew, he's got his YouTube channel up there as well, sharing a ton of stuff. So there's lots and lots of wonderful free resources for people to go in and see if this message makes sense for them. But most importantly, I think we need to be kinder to ourselves, as you said, because if you truly believe that God lives within, and as Greg Braden uncovered in one of his many quests to understand the divine nature of our human being, on the surface layer of every single cell in the body is the message God lies within. So God lies within this being that we are. So if you believe that, you can't hate it. You have to love it. So be kind to yourself first. And if you are, you'll be kinder to everyone else. You can't be kind to the world and beat yourself up. You can be, but it comes again with that little bit of a shift in energy, and it's not as pure. So love yourself first and see what happens. And don't think of it as being selfish. Think of it as being the most selfless thing you can do.
Yeah. Excellent advice. Well, thank you. I'll put all the links in the show note. I also have an affiliate link that I'll put in there.
Yes, definitely use Tanya's link. I mean, yes, the work that you're doing, and yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. All right, big hugs. Thank you so much. Stay on the line. Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll see you in the next video or the next podcast.